I invite you to stand this morning for the reading of the gospel. This is from Matthew chapter 13. Jesus continuing with these parables, and another one where Jesus explained the parable. Beginning with verse 24. Jesus put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. But while everybody was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. And the slaves of the householder came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? He answered, An enemy has done this. The slave said to him, Then do you want us to go and gather them? But he replied, No, for in gathering the weeds you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest, and at harvest time I will tell the reapers, Collect the weeds first, and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. In verse 36, Then Jesus left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples approached him, saying, Explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. He answered, The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are children of the evil one. The enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom in all causes of sin and all evildoers, and they will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Please be seated. Have you ever had trouble living your faith? I mean, I'm not saying that for you to doubt your salvation or to doubt your faith. That's not what I'm saying. My question is, have you ever had trouble living it? I have. And I imagine that most of us have at one time or another. There are times when just who we are as human beings and our less than godly natures rise to the fore. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we make mistakes living our faith. I have been known to pop off on more than one occasion, and I try not to, and it's certainly not near as bad as it used to be. I was raised, and that's I've said that too often, but we very much are products of how we were raised, and in a home where temper was the norm, and everybody walked around on eggshells trying to not break anybody else's or cross anybody else's lines. And I could rise to a fight, and that was real easily. I mean, just very, very easily. So living our faith is quite often living in ways that have to be intentional. We have to think about how to live our faith. Now, there are, and it's like any other habit, the more we do it consciously, the better we get at it. I remember, there are certain things, muscle memory for folks who work in the physical world, or for athletes. There are certain motions you just repeat over and over and over. Have you ever watched a good or a skilled worker drive a nail? Seriously, I mean, if you've ever done, and you probably had a handful of these with you at Newberry this week, folks who know how to build. Brian had in his office a few days ago, he had a a very large hammer, and somebody looked at it and said, well, what is that? I said, that is a framing hammer. Because a skilled person with that hammer, 2 licks and the nail's in. 1 lick to set and then one hard lick. And so it got a long handle, so it has a lot of velocity when it hits, and that nail is in. It's done. Now, somebody who's not used to using that will grab that hammer and won't hold it at the end. They'll hold it up real close to the head, and they'll go tap, 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 tap. And it'll take them 72 licks, and they'll get that nail in about halfway, and then they'll bend it. So anything that we do takes practice. Now, living our faith, not only does it take practice, sometimes there are those around us that love to see us fail. They love to see us trip, or they want us to stop living our faith just because they may not recognize that it's faithful living. They just know that it's irritating because it's not how they want to live their lives. So, what I want to do this morning, just for a few moments, is to talk about some habits of how to live our faith when it angers others. Now, notice the title. I didn't say living your faith to make others angry. Okay? There's a difference. You know, not living your faith to make others angry. That sounds like a lot of fun, personally, but that's not the point. Living our faith when it angers others. In other words, to live it so it is so unusual that others have to pay attention. The first thing I want to offer to you on living your faith is to be joyful. Now, I'm not saying to be happy. To be joyful. And to be joyful, it means that I am living my life with the knowledge and understanding that my salvation, that my relationship with Jesus Christ is secure. That there is not, that I have faith, I have hope in Christ, and not only is it enduring, but it is growing. And the more effort and energy I expend there, the more of my relationship with Christ will develop. If you hit the gym, and the research shows it over and over and over, no matter what age you are, if you will get into the gym and begin to work, then you will gain strength. When you gain physical strength, your body is healthier. And we can do this at any time in our lives, whether we are very young. It's easy. I always hated those guys. You know, they do 3 or 4 curls and they've got biceps. But if we work at it, we gain strength. When we exercise our faith and recognize that we are doing just that, we gain joy because we see results from the expenditure. Striving for excellence. Now, that doesn't sound necessarily like a faith component, but in every part of our lives, when we give our very best to whatever we are doing, we are also exercising our faith. We are living our faith. It is a demonstration of our faith. Have you ever known that person that was just, they just, maybe in the workplace, maybe in a social group, and there was always the praise Jesus. Everything is hunky-dory. Everything is sweetness and light. You ever worked with one of those? They're irritating. They're just irritating. Because, and not that I don't believe in that faith, but when you look at the rest of their life and they're only going with half measures, they're doing just enough to cover a little bit of ground. Jesus was a carpenter. Right? We all know that. The scripture gives that to us, that Jesus was a carpenter. Can you imagine Jesus doing half work? Can you imagine Jesus putting a piece of furniture together and it just really didn't fit well? And it just wouldn't hold up. And then as carpenter, he's working with his hands. He's making a living for he and his family. Can you imagine him selling a piece of shoddy goods or shoddy workmanship? Can you imagine that? I cannot. Strive for excellence in whatever it is that you are doing, whether it's being a parent, whether it's being a spouse, whether it is in the workplace, or whether it is in trying to exercise your faith. Strive for excellence. Give it your best. Supporting others. All of our lives have some kind of interaction. Some of you are introverts. This last several days, I was in Sumter. Boy, there's a party town. Sumter, South Carolina. Woo! And we were working at Trinity United Methodist, and we had a group of clergy candidates. And as we were working with them, one of the mentors that was working with them is an extreme introvert. Smart, hard-working, but at the end of any kind of interaction with a lot of people, she is just exhausted. Just absolutely and utterly exhausted. But she comes in and she works with people. She supports people. She gives herself to people. Some of you are type A's, and you just love people. You feed on that energy, and you just dive right into a crowd, and it's great. Support others. It is not just be with others, support others. What can you do to support people in your home, in your workplace, in your neighborhood? These are ways that you can encourage others to be faithful. It is a part of living our faith together. In Matthew, Jesus says, freely you have received, freely give. Giving of yourself, support others. Now, another thing that we can do in living and exercising our faith is to forgive. All right, this is when the preacher is preaching and he's not good at it. Because I've got, and forgiveness is what I have learned in a couple of my life experiences, is that forgiveness is not an immediate notion. Forgiveness is something that I have to continually do for the same thing. Because just because I have forgiven does not mean that I have what? Forgotten. And so forgiveness is not an action. Forgiveness is a process. Forgiveness is a process. But what I do find is the more that I practice forgiveness, the less hold the action has on me. So as I practice forgiveness, I find my faith strengthened. And you and I are called as Christians, as followers of Jesus Christ, as children of God, you and I are called and expected to forgive. Now, hang on to that thought, because it's real easy, and we live in a society where when somebody does something to you, you do what? Not only do you get them back, you do one step more, right? Somebody hits me, I hit them twice. Well, that's the culture we live in, but that is opposite of what the gospel calls us to do. The gospel says forgive. Now here's one. How about embracing failure? How about embracing failure? Now, I see a couple of y'all's faces like going, I'm not sure about that. Embrace failure and admit it so that you can learn from it. Now, it took me a long time. It took me 13 years to get my undergraduate degree. That was through, did we count 6 or 7 schools? I don't remember. Anyway, a bunch. Some I got kicked out of. Some I just left because I knew I was going nowhere. I had distractions. Some of it's my ADD. It's just hard for me. It was hard for me to learn. But what I did learn from that in embracing failure, that when I started on my seminary degree, I was driven. I was driven to not just to get the grades, but as much as anything to get it done and to accomplish this. So embracing failure and using it as fuel for your fire to understand that when we experience failure, we can hold those who are experiencing that same, whether they have lost a job, whether you have a family member who has lost something, wherever, when we understand it, when we embrace it, we can hold somebody else who's experienced that. It is a way that we can strengthen our faith. How about being a friend? Do you know where most people, when folks come to visit New Beginnings, you know where most of them come from? When somebody else has invited them. Now, they may not have come with them, but they have been invited by somebody. We have few. There's a regular flow of folks that found us on the internet. Surprise! I mean, we have more folks that find us on the internet than you can imagine. Some folks will drive by and they'll say, "Oh, Methodist Church, we've just moved here." Here they come. But the majority of them come because they've been invited. How about being a friend? Whether it is, just putting yourself out there. And it's a challenge when life is tough to see Christ in others. It is a challenge to find strength in others. Now, how about if you have put yourself out to be in relationship to someone and they can rely on your strength? It's not to be a friend so that you can draw strength from them. We put ourselves out to allow them to draw strength from us. It's a matter of giving, not receiving. Now, what will happen in that exchange? You will find strength. But the intent is to place yourself out there, to be in relationship with others. For some of you, that's hard. For some of us, that's hard. Because it may not be natural because you are shy. It may not be natural because you're more introverted. It may be you're in a situation where there's a whole bunch of folks who like to do this, and you think this is boring. And, okay, doesn't mean you can't build a relationship to be a friend so that you are there for them. Be grateful. One of the greatest things that you and I can do in living our faith is to demonstrate gratitude. Now, gratitude goes a long, long way. There is a lost art, and art's the wrong word for it. There's a lost custom. You know what that lost custom is? Thank you notes. Thank you notes. We don't do that, and I say we because I do some, but I don't do nearly as many as I should. Just writing a thank you notes and just demonstrating thanks. But what about being grateful for the things that are around us? One of the things that gratitude allows us to do is to gain perspective when we are intentionally grateful. There are two types of people that will try to convince you about the rightness of their belief. One of them is just the natural fighter. That's just what they want to do. They want to fight. And it's just no matter, and if you say, that the sky is purple, they're going to say it's green, even though it's blue, just because they want to fight. And there's some of that in me. I'll admit that. And my family will go, "You think?" But there's also the person that's going to try to convince you of the rightness of their cause because they love you. And I'm convinced that there are more people like that, whether it's politically or a faith-based conversation, or just, I don't understand anybody who doesn't eat crawfish. Because I just think I think crawfish are God's candy. And which is why God placed them in South Louisiana, because that's where God lives. So anyway, I think we practice, not just learn, but we practice gratitude because it changes our perspective. It allows us to see that others are interested in us. And when we are grateful for their actions in our lives, it changes the way that we see them. And I believe that when we see them through eyes that are grateful, we see them a little more as Christ has created them. And then to be humble. Heavens. Humility is not, humility is not natural, you know? You know why? Humility is not natural because each of us has a drive within us that wants us to go and be and to do, and it's also a safety issue. And so we place ourselves out there, and to be humble is to intentionally place ourselves second. So I encourage us to practice humility by placing the other first. Now, how do we do this? Well, and we'll start off with what we were talking about several minutes ago, and that's prayer. Even if you're not quite sure that all of your beliefs are perfectly lined up, I encourage you to pray. And you practice. And prayer is an exercise. It's a part of it's a spiritual discipline. It's what we do to strengthen our faith. So we can go on and on and on with this, but by practicing our faith, it places us in relationship with others. And as we are placed in relationship with others, that it's a non-threatening relationship, they see a little more of Christ in us, and maybe they'll be drawn a little more closely to the throne. Thanks be to God. Amen. At this time, I'm going to invite